What if I told you the most dominant driver this weekend started the race from second place, dropped
ninth by turn 4, and still won by 5.5 seconds? And what if the man who led this race in the very first lap wasn't the pole sitter, wasn't the championship leader? He was a 41-year-old in red who spent an entire year being told his best days were behind him. Because here's the question nobody is asking out loud yet. If Lewis Hamilton can do this in just race 2, what happens when Ferrari closed the gap to Mercedes? Something happened in Shanghai this weekend that Formula One fans are going to be talking about for a very long time. And no, I'm not just talking about a race result. I'm talking about a complete and total shift in the story of this 2026 season that nobody saw coming after just 2 rounds. A teenage Italian kid, who only months ago was parking cars at a karting circuit near Bologna, stood on the top step of a Formula One podium and broke down in tears. And standing right next to him, grinning from ear to ear in a red Ferrari race suit, was the 7-time world champion, ending one of the most painful droughts of his entire career. 1 race, 2 historic moments. And honestly, the weekend didn't even start smoothly for either of them. So the real question is, how did we get here? And more importantly, what does this actually mean for the rest of 2026? Let's go back to Friday. FP1, the only practice session of the entire weekend. And within the first 5 minutes, Lewis Hamilton had already spun his Ferrari at turn 6. Rear brakes locked, car out of shape. And because of that early flat spot, Ferrari were forced to burn his medium tires and switch to softs way earlier than they wanted. His FP1 lap time? Meaningless compared to everyone else. Meanwhile, up at the front, George Russell and Kimi Antonelli were running a 1-2 for Mercedes and were already over half a second clear of the entire field. To most people watching, this looked like another Mercedes whitewash weekend was coming. But here's where it gets interesting. Sprint qualifying came around, and Hamilton quietly put together a 4th place on the grid, solid, composed, no drama. Antonelli, though, was under investigation. He'd edged out into Norris's path in the pit lane, and there were complaints over radio. No penalty came, but the tension was already building around the young Italian before he'd even turned a wheel in anger. Russell took sprint pole and looked untouchable. Everything pointed toward a very straightforward Saturday for Mercedes. And then the sprint race happened, and everything that was straightforward went straight out the window. The sprint lights go out. Russell leads. That's normal. What was not normal was Lewis Hamilton, starting 4th, surging through the field, passing Antonelli, passing Norris, and then diving up the inside of Russell at turn 9 to take the lead of the sprint race. A 41-year-old man, in his second race weekend for Ferrari, leading a sprint race in Shanghai. The crowd loved it. The Ferrari garage loved it. And for one brief, electric moment, it felt like the old Lewis was completely back. I had so much fun. It was one of the most enjoyable races I've had in a long, long time, if ever. Lewis Hamilton, post-race. But here's the thing most people glossed over. While Hamilton was leading at the front, Kimi Antonelli, the hottest rookie prospect in the sport, had quietly dropped to 9th after a collision with Hadjar at turn 4. He had a 10-second penalty. The weekend looked like it was falling apart for him, and most people assumed he'd quietly fade into the midfield and regroup for Sunday. Repeat button, most people were wrong. What Antonelli did in the second half of that sprint race is the kind of thing that makes you realize you're watching a generational talent. From 9th, with a penalty hanging over him, he cut through the midfield like it wasn't even there. He passed both McLarens. He then pulled off a move on Hamilton at turn 14, a move that should not be possible under those conditions, and then 2 laps later, did the exact same thing to Leclerc. The penalty cost him the result, but the pace? The pace was undeniable. By the time qualifying came around on Saturday evening, Antonelli walked out and put in a lap that shattered Sebastian Vettel's record for the youngest pole sitter in Formula One history. He was 19 years old. And for the first time in a long time, the paddock genuinely didn't know what was coming next. Then came the Grand Prix. And this is where the story goes from remarkable to something else entirely. Hamilton, starting 3rd, somehow got into turn 1 ahead of both Mercedes cars at the race start. The crowd didn't believe it. The commentators nearly lost their minds. For a second lap of a Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton was leading a Formula One race in a Ferrari. And the smile on his face over team radio when he crossed the line for the first time said everything you needed to know about how badly he'd been waiting for a moment like this. That was a fantastic job, guys. I'm proud of what we're doing. Forza Ferrari. Lewis Hamilton, team radio after the race. Antonelli eventually retook the lead and never looked back. But the race wasn't done serving up drama. After the safety car, triggered by Stroll's Aston Martin stopping at turn 2, the restart reshuffled everything. Russell's tires were stone cold, and he lost positions immediately. And what followed between Hamilton and Leclerc in the closing stages was the kind of racing that you don't usually see between teammates. They touched wheels. They diced through corners. They swapped positions 4 times in 14 laps. Hamilton later said the contact was just a kiss. But make no mistake, this was serious, uncompromising wheel-to-wheel combat. Clean, fierce, and brilliant to watch. Meanwhile, McLaren weren't even in the race. Both Norris and Piastri failed to start due to separate electrical failures, a catastrophic double DNF that handed massive points to their rivals. Verstappen retired late in the race. Alonso, Stroll, all gone. And suddenly the championship picture looked very, very different. Mercedes sat on 98 points after 2 rounds. Ferrari on 67. And McLaren, the preseason favorite for many, stranded on just 18 points having barely competed. In Parc Ferme, Antonelli broke down in tears. Hamilton walked straight over to him, embraced him, and said, "I'm so happy for you, buddy." The man whose seat Antonelli took at Mercedes. The man who spent a year being out-qualified, outscored and outpositioned in his first Ferrari season. Standing there in red, on the podium, arm around a crying 19-year-old Italian, shouting Forza Ferrari into the camera. It was one of those rare F1 moments that transcends the sport entirely. So here's what makes this weekend so important going forward. Because 3 very different stories could now unfold over the next few months. The first scenario, and the one Ferrari fans are desperate to believe in, is that the SF26 continues to develop rapidly. Hamilton finds his rhythm, and by the midpoint of the season Ferrari are genuinely in a title fight. The podium in China is the beginning of the Lewis Hamilton-Ferrari era actually delivering what everyone hoped it would. The second scenario is trickier. Mercedes are dominant. Their race pace in Shanghai was on another level, even on a day where they finished 1-2-3 with a Ferrari in between. If they continue to pull away in the championship, and Ferrari's power unit deficit remains, because that gap is real and Hamilton himself acknowledged it, then third places become the ceiling rather than the floor. And that's a problem nobody at Maranello wants to admit yet. And the third scenario? The most fascinating one. What happens internally at Ferrari when Hamilton keeps racing Leclerc like he did in China? Because those two fought each other harder on Sunday than they fought Mercedes. If that battle intensifies, if the two Ferrari superstars start costing each other points, then this rivalry inside the Red Garage could become the defining story of 2026. Not Ferrari versus Mercedes. Ferrari versus Ferrari. If you made it this far, you already know Formula One is never just about speed. It's about strategy, pressure, history, and sometimes the kind of drama that only reveals itself over months and seasons. China gave us a teenage Italian making history and crying on the podium. It gave us a 41-year-old legend finally standing on top in red after the longest wait of his recent career. It gave us a McLaren implosion, a Verstappen DNF, and one of the great teammate battles in recent memory, all in a single Sunday afternoon in Shanghai. So now I want to know what you think. Is Lewis Hamilton genuinely back? And does Ferrari have a real title shot this year? Or is Mercedes simply too fast, and China was just a perfect storm? And most importantly, if Hamilton and Leclerc keep racing each other like that, who blinks first? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Because this season, it's only just getting started.